The truth about AI startup innovation isn't just in code. It's in paperwork. Who gets added to a committee agenda? Whose address shows up on an invoice? And which vendor gets paid right before a policy meeting? Blackledger is starting a skeptical inquiry. One overlooked Atlanta document detail connected AI startup funding to a lobbying pipeline. Not rumors, a match you can verify, fields that line up when you cross-check them. Here's the premise we're testing. Startups don't only compete on algorithms, they compete on access. Access leaves a paper trail. Filings, procurement notices, registered agent records, correspondence addresses, and invoice metadata. And if influence is being bought, it'll show up as coordination, repeated intermediaries, recurring spending categories, and timing that doesn't match normal operations. Now we get to the Atlanta clue, the anchor. The document is a Georgia Business Registry record pulled through the Georgia Corporations Division Entity Search for an AI policy consulting entity operating under a local Atlanta correspondence address. The ordinary-looking detail is the registered agent address field, specifically the registered agent address line. It's on a state record dated with a stamp showing the agent appointment effective date, an item most people ignore. But the clue isn't the date by itself. It's what the address equals when you compare it to billing. Cut to Exhibit 1. Match these two fields. On the Georgia record, the registered agent address is listed as 1231 Peachtree Street, NE, Atlanta, GA 3309. Then in the procurement and consulting invoice set tied to multiple innovation grants, the invoice correspondence address lists the same 1231 Peachtree Street, NE. Same suite numbering behavior, same city, same unit style. That is the kind of coincidence that only survives until you look at the dates. Timeline: invoice, payment, policy meeting. Invoice date, March 14, 2023. Payment date fragment from a bank statement line item, April 6, 2023. Then a week later, April 12, 2023, a committee calendar shows an internal meeting note referencing AI adoption pathways and stakeholder briefing. We are not claiming motive from a date alone. We're establishing sequence. Finance follows access. Influence follows finance. Let's show the first mismatch, ledger style. Public claim, startup funding supports research, safety evaluations, and open partnerships. Ledger reality, a pattern of payments labeled as consulting, liaison, and government interface support, routed through that same Atlanta address and repeated vendor contacts. Put it side by side. Column A, pitch narrative. Short timelines, product uncertainty, we're scaling quickly. Column B, funding behavior. Payments concentrate around policy windows, not engineering milestones. Column C, beneficiary signals. The intermediaries, not the R&D teams, show recurring roles and consistent billing addresses. This is where suspicion becomes method. It was all paperwork, until paperwork started pointing to the same places, the same dates, and the same gatekeepers. Now we trace the money trail. We map the liaison vendors to startup capital flows. Start with the startup's incoming funds, grant disbursement or investment tranches, and then look for outward transfers that match invoice metadata. In the bank statement fragments, payment lines show amounts matching invoices, down to the rounded cent totals typical of vendor billing. One example fragment, wire ACH out, 1231 Peachtree Street, NE, with an invoice reference that matches the invoice number on the stamped consultant document. The stamped invoice is crucial. It includes an invoice date, a service period, and an issued to entity name. Those three fields become the join keys connecting capital inflow at the startup to payment outflow to the intermediary. From there, we see the same correspondence address repeat across different startups. Same Atlanta address, different startup logos, same vendor structure. This is how the lobbying machine behaves. It doesn't need to advertise lobbying. It needs to coordinate access. And it does that through relationship maintenance spending, cataloged as compliance-adjacent services. Expose the pattern. Repeated roles, program liaison, policy interface support, regulatory readiness consulting. Recurring intermediaries, vendors linked to the same Atlanta correspondence address, often sharing registered agents or overlapping corporate management. Recurring relationship maintenance spend, invoices timed to pre-briefing periods, not product launch cycles. Shell-like wrappers too, not retail or speculative theater, but administrative packaging. Entities and vendors that provide an official channel for communication while keeping the real beneficiary ambiguous. Now zoom into the evidence. Courtroom-style exhibit callouts, because the key line is one sentence, one field, one match. Cut to Exhibit 2. The Georgia entity record shows registered agent address, 1231 Peachtree Street, NE, Atlanta, GA 30309. The invoice document in Exhibit 2 shows correspondence address, 1231 Peachtree Street, NE, Atlanta, GA 30309. And the bank statement fragment shows payment reference, INV 0314-2023, on the April 6, 2023 line. That tie is what connects Atlanta paperwork to funding behavior, not an allegation, a join between fields across jurisdictions and document types. Now let's analyze incentives. Why would startups pay for access? Because access can reduce uncertainty. In AI, uncertainty is the business environment, licensing, procurement eligibility, data governance requirements, and emerging regulatory definitions. If a startup can shape perceived legitimacy, how agencies categorize the technology, how procurement offices interpret MISC, it gains speed. Even when the product roadmap is vague, the regulatory narrative can be crisp. So consulting becomes a tool. Procurement. Get on vendor lists. Qualify faster. Regulatory shaping. Influence how rules are drafted or interpreted. Perceived legitimacy. Show that a third party handled compliance. But here's the uncomfortable contrast. Public messaging. We prioritize responsible AI and safety. Internal paperwork. Payments clustered around policy moments, not around technical safety deliverables. Discrepancy to watch. If invoices repeatedly show stakeholder engagement, while engineering milestones lag, or if deliverables are described loosely, then spending is doing more than building software. And when scrutiny increases, compliance language can obscure beneficiaries. The documents may use careful phrasing, policy readiness, regulatory interface, stakeholder communications. Those labels can be legitimate, but they also create a gray space where influence is purchased without a clear lobbying label. So what's the risk? Regulatory scrutiny forces disclosure, but administrative wrappers can redirect where disclosure lands, complicating who benefits from lobbying spend. The pattern we're highlighting is not that every payment is improper. It's that a specific Atlanta address detail, registered agent correspondence, reappears as a billing anchor tied to a timing sequence around policy activity. Outrage isn't just anger at bad actors. It's the feeling that it was all paperwork, until you read the paperwork the way investigators do. Now your skeptical takeaway. When you investigate AI startup claims, don't just ask who invested, ask what addresses repeat. What entity correspondence fields match invoices? What payment dates cluster before policy events? What intermediaries show up across multiple companies? One overlooked detail can expose a pipeline. The exact Atlanta registered agent address line matched to invoice correspondence address, then aligned to payment timing relative to influence activity. If you want to keep digging, replicate the method. Start with Georgia Corporation's division entity search. Capture the registered agent address. Then cross-match it against invoice correspondence address fields. Finally, build a timeline, invoice date, payment date, and any nearby policy meeting or procurement action. That's how you move from suspicion to verification. And if you'd like Blackledger to do the next cross-match, comment with the Atlanta entity name you're looking at and which document screenshot you have.